Odin hangs from the Yggdrasil for 9 days, pierced by his own spear, and learns that everything he loves will burn. The gods know how they'll die. They know the wolf is coming for the sun. They know the serpent will poison the sky. They know their children will kill each other in the snow, and they feast anyway. This is what made the Norse different. Other cultures promised eternal heavens, gardens of paradise, cycles of perfect return. The Norse promised nothing except courage in the face of certain doom. They built a cosmos knowing it would collapse. They created beauty knowing it would burn. They loved deeply knowing loss was inevitable. Before the final battle, before the 3 winters with no summer between them, there was a world held together by a tree under constant attack, a golden age that everyone knew couldn't last. Gods who were part giant, constantly at war with their own origins, and a prophecy that couldn't be changed no matter how much wisdom you bought with your own eye. The Hindus tracked cosmic time in yugas spanning millions of years, from golden ages to iron corruption. The Maya carved calendars that spiraled toward catastrophic resets. The Chinese watched dynasties rise and collapse like clockwork, each claiming the mandate of heaven until heaven withdrew its favor. Every culture that looked closely at history saw the same pattern. Everything that rises must fall. But the Norse were the only ones who made their gods mortal, the only ones who said, yes, even heaven dies, even the tree will burn, even the wise will be devoured. This is the story of what came before that end, not a paradise lost, but a temporary order carved from chaos through murder, a world built from a giant's corpse, balanced on a dying tree, ruled by gods who sacrificed their own eyes and hung themselves from branches to steal knowledge that wouldn't save them. There was no sky, no earth beneath it, no ocean, no wind, no stars, just a yawning gap called Ginnunga Gap. The word itself sounds like absence, like the gasp of air before a scream that never comes. In the beginning, according to the Norse, there was nothing, but not the kind of nothing we imagine when we close our eyes. This was a void so complete that even emptiness had weight, a chasm between 2 opposing forces. To the north lay Niflheim, a realm of mist, ice, and primordial cold. 11 rivers called the Elevagar flowed from a central wellspring named Vergelmir, freezing as they poured into the gap. Each layer of ice built upon the last, silent, still, eternal. To the south burned Muspelheim, a land of fire and chaos, guarded by a giant named Surtur. He carried a flaming sword and waited, always waiting. His realm spat sparks and molten rivers toward the center of the void, where heat met frost. When fire touched ice, something extraordinary happened. Not an explosion, a melting. The frozen rivers thawed just enough to drip. Those drops mingled with the heat from Muspelheim and began to coalesce, not into water or steam, but into flesh. From that primordial slush emerged Ymir, the first being, a giant made of ice and fire. He didn't think, he didn't speak, he simply was. Ymir slept, and as he slept, he sweated. From the sweat under his left arm grew a male and a female giant. From his legs, another giant was born. These were the Jotnar, the frost giants, the first race to populate the void. But Ymir needed sustenance. The ice continued to melt, and from it came Audhumla, a cosmic cow. She licked the salty rhinestones for nourishment, and Ymir drank her milk to survive. 4 rivers of milk flowed from her udders, endless, life-giving. As Audhumla licked the ice, something began to emerge. First, hair, then a head, then an entire man, beautiful, strong, and radiant. His name was Buri, the first of the gods. Buri had a son named Bor. Bor married a giantess named Bestla, daughter of a giant named Boltorn. Together they had 3 sons, Odin, Vili, Ve. These 3 brothers looked at the void and saw only chaos. They looked at Ymir and saw only raw material, so they made a choice that would echo through all the ages to come. They killed him. When Ymir fell, his blood poured out in torrents so vast that it drowned nearly all the frost giants. Only one survived, Bergelmir and his wife. They escaped in a hollowed tree trunk and drifted across the flood until they found solid ground. From them, all future giants would descend. But Odin and his brothers didn't stop with murder. They dragged Ymir's corpse into the center of Ginnungagap and began to build. His flesh became the earth, rich soil spread across the void. His blood became the seas and lakes, churning with memory of violence. His bones became mountains, jagged and unyielding. His teeth and broken shards of bone became stones and pebbles scattered across the land. His skull, massive and hollow, was lifted high and became the dome of the sky. 4 dwarves, Nordri, Sudri, Austri, and Vestri, were placed at each corner to hold it aloft. North, south, east, west. The cardinal directions were born from a dead giant's head. His brains were flung into the air and became clouds, drifting, formless thoughts of the first being. His hair became trees. His eyelashes were curved into a protective barrier around the center of the world, a place that would be called Midgard, the realm of men. But there was still no light. The brothers gathered sparks from Muspelheim, burning embers that still drifted through the void. They placed them in the sky and created the sun and moon, 2 chariots, forever racing across the heavens. The sun was driven by a goddess named Sol, the moon by her brother, Mani. Behind them, 2 wolves gave chase. Skull pursued the sun. Hati Hrodvitnisson chased the moon. One day, the wolves would catch their prey. One day, the light would go out, but not yet. This was the first age, the age of formation. The gods had taken chaos and imposed order. They had murdered the past to create the future, and in doing so, they set a pattern that would repeat across cultures and continents. In Babylonian myth, the god Marduk slays the primordial dragon Tiamat and fashions the world from her body. Her ribs become the vault of heaven. Her tears become the Tigris and Euphrates, creation through dismemberment. In Chinese cosmology, the giant Pangu separates the sky from the earth by holding them apart for 18,000 years. When he finally dies, his body transforms. His breath becomes wind. His voice becomes thunder. His left eye the sun. His right eye the moon. His limbs become the 4 cardinal directions. The pattern repeats. A cosmic being is sacrificed. Order is carved from chaos. The world is not created from nothing. It's built from the remains of something older. But creation is never clean. Violence leaves scars. The giants never forgave the gods for what they did to Ymir. That wound would fester across the ages, growing wider with every broken promise and every stolen treasure. Eventually, it would tear the world apart. This origin story reveals something profound about the Norse worldview. They understood that civilization is built on violence, that every society emerges from the conquest of what came before. The gods didn't create ex nihilo. They murdered and repurposed. This honest brutality distinguishes Norse mythology from other traditions. In Genesis, God speaks and creation appears, clean, orderly, peaceful. The Norse knew better. They knew that every field was once a forest torn down, every farm was carved from wilderness, every kingdom was built on conquered land. So they told a creation story that acknowledged this truth. The world was made from murder, and that original sin, that primal violence, could never be fully erased. The giants remembered. They passed down the story of Ymir's death through generations. They nursed their grievance like a fire that never quite went out. And when Ragnarok finally came, when the world burned and the gods fell, it was the giants who marched from every direction to exact their revenge. This is the original sin of the Norse cosmos, not disobedience, not pride, murder. And unlike in other traditions, there was no redemption from this sin, no sacrifice that could cleanse it. The debt would come due, the cycle would complete. Before Odin sat on the high throne of Asgard, there were other gods, older powers, the Vanir. They are mentioned in the Norse texts, but always as secondary figures, the supporting cast in a drama dominated by Odin and his kin. But the fragments that remain suggest something different. The Vanir were not subordinate, they were equals, perhaps even predecessors. Njord was a Vanir god of the sea and wind. His children, Freyr and Freya, were among the most beloved deities in the Norse pantheon. Freya governed fertility, sunshine, and prosperity. Freya was goddess of love, beauty, war, and death. She received half of those who died in battle. The other half went to Odin's Valhalla. These were not minor figures. They were central to Norse spiritual life. Farmers prayed to Freya for good harvests. Lovers invoked Freya. Sailors made offerings to Njord. And yet, they were foreigners in Asgard, hostages, technically, sent to live among the Aesir after a war that nearly destroyed both pantheons. The war between the Aesir and the Vanir is one of the most mysterious episodes in Norse mythology. The sources are fragmentary, details are scarce, but the outline is clear. There was a woman named Gullveig. She came to Asgard and spoke of gold, of wealth, of greed. Some say she was a Vanir witch practicing Seder, a form of magic associated with prophecy and manipulation of fate. The Aesir were disturbed by her. They tried to kill her. 3 times they burned her. 3 times she rose from the flames, reborn, unchanged. This act of violence sparked the war. The Vanir came to avenge Gullveig. The Aesir defended their realm. The conflict raged for years. Neither side could win. The Vanir wielded magic that the Aesir couldn't counter. The Aesir possessed martial strength that the Vanir couldn't match. Stalemate. Eventually both sides grew weary. They met to negotiate peace. The terms were unusual. Instead of a simple treaty, they would exchange hostages. The Vanir sent Njord, Freyr, and Freya to live in Asgard. The Aesir sent 2 figures to Vanaheim. One was Honir, described as handsome but indecisive. The other was Mimir, the wise giant who guarded the Well of Knowledge. The Vanir soon realized they'd been cheated. Honir was useless without Mimir to advise him. Furious, they beheaded Mimir and sent his head back to Odin. Odin preserved the head with herbs and magic. He consulted it for wisdom for the rest of his days. Mimir's counsel from beyond death. Despite this breach, the peace held. The Vanir gods integrated into Aesir society. Njord married Skadi, a giantess who sought vengeance for her father's death. Freya fell in love with a giant maiden named Gerda and gave away his magic sword to win her hand. Freya married a mysterious god named Order, who disappeared, leaving her to weep tears of gold. Over time, the distinction between Aesir and Vanir blurred. The 2 groups became one pantheon, but the memory of their separateness remained. Scholars have puzzled over this war for centuries. What does it represent? One theory suggests it reflects an actual historical conflict. Perhaps 2 different groups of people, with different religious traditions, came into contact in prehistoric Scandinavia. The Aesir gods represented the pantheon of Indo-European invaders, warrior gods of sky and thunder. The Vanir gods represented older indigenous deities, fertility gods tied to the land and sea. When these cultures merged, their gods merged too. The myth of the Aesir-Vanir war preserved the memory of that cultural fusion. This pattern appears everywhere in mythology. In Greece, the Olympian gods overthrew the Titans, an older generation of deities. Zeus and his siblings didn't create the world. They conquered it. In Mesopotamia, the god Marduk rose to supremacy by defeating Tiamat and reorganizing the cosmos. But he wasn't the first god. He was a latecomer who seized power. In India, the Devas and Asuras were once equals, 2 groups of divine beings. Over time, the Devas became gods and the Asuras became demons. But originally, they were kin who competed for dominance. The pattern is consistent. New gods displace old gods. Conquerors absorb the beliefs of the conquered. Pantheons merge. In China, this process is explicit. Each new dynasty claimed the mandate of heaven. divine approval to rule. When a dynasty fell, it meant the mandate had been withdrawn. The new rulers weren't rebels. They were instruments of cosmic justice. The Shang dynasty worshipped Shangdi, the supreme ancestor deity. When the Zhou overthrew the Shang, they rebranded Shangdi as Tian, heaven itself. Same god, new name, new theological framework. This is religious syncretism, the blending of beliefs when cultures collide. It's how religions actually evolve, not through revelation, but through contact and negotiation. The Norse preserved an unusually clear memory of this process. Most mythologies erase the seams. They present their pantheons as eternal and unified. The Norse kept the story of the war. They acknowledged that their gods were composite. This honesty extended to other aspects of their mythology. The gods were not all-knowing or all-powerful. They made mistakes. They learned. They changed. Odin himself was a seeker. He traveled in disguise, gathering knowledge. He learned Seder magic from Freyja, a practice traditionally associated with women and the Vanir. For a male Aesir god to practice Seder was considered shameful. But Odin did it anyway because he valued wisdom over reputation. This willingness to learn from former enemies distinguishes the Aesir. They didn't just conquer the Vanir, they absorbed their knowledge. But there's another layer to this story. Some scholars believe the Vanir represent an even older stratum of belief, not just a different tribe's gods, but remnants of Neolithic religion. Before agriculture, before cities, before writing, humans worshipped differently. The focus was on the earth itself, fertility, the cycles of nature, the goddess. Nerthus was a goddess mentioned by the Roman historian Tacitus. He described her worship among Germanic tribes in the 1st century AD. Once a year, her statue was carried in a wagon pulled by cows. Wherever she traveled, weapons were laid aside and peace prevailed. After the procession, the wagon and statue were washed in a sacred lake. The slaves who performed the washing were then drowned, returned to the goddess. Nerthus is linguistically related to Njord, masculine and feminine versions of the same name. This suggests that Njord was originally paired with a goddess, perhaps his sister. The Norse texts mention that the Vanir practiced sibling marriage, which the Aesir considered taboo. This detail hints at profound cultural differences. The Vanir represented older social structures, more egalitarian, less hierarchical, centered on fertility and the earth rather than war and sky. When Indo-European peoples spread across Europe between 5,000 and 3,000 years ago, they brought their pantheon of sky gods, Zeus, Jupiter, Thor, all variants of the same thunder god. But they encountered people already living on those lands, people with their own gods, earth goddesses, fertility deities, spirits of place. Rather than completely erasing these older beliefs, the newcomers absorbed them. The local goddess became the wife or daughter of the sky god. The fertility rituals continued, but under new management. The Aesir-Vanir War might be a mythological memory of this process, the conflict, the negotiation, the integration. If this interpretation is correct, then Freyja and Freya represent something ancient, gods that predated the Norse themselves, deities that had been worshipped in Scandinavia for thousands of years before Odin's cult arrived. This would explain why Freyja in particular remained so powerful in Norse belief. She wasn't Odin's creation. She was older than him, and the people remembered. Even after Christianity came to Scandinavia, Freyja's cult persisted. Her name became synonymous with witchcraft and forbidden magic, but she endured in folk practice long after Odin and Thor were forgotten. This is the power of the old gods, the ones tied to the land itself. They can be suppressed, rebranded, demonized, but they never quite disappear. At the center of all existence stands Yggdrasil, the world tree. Its roots burrow into 3 separate realms. Its trunk rises through the middle world. Its branches spread so wide they shelter 9 different realities. This is not metaphor. For the Norse, Yggdrasil was as real as the earth beneath their feet. More real perhaps, because the earth was temporary, but the tree was eternal. The word Yggdrasil can be translated as Odin's horse. Ygr is one of Odin's many names. Drasil means horse, but this isn't because Odin rode the tree like a mount. It's because in Old Norse, riding the gallows meant hanging. Odin hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear, a sacrifice of himself to himself. During those 9 days, he peered into the abyss and learned the runes, symbols of power that governed reality itself. This makes Yggdrasil a place of transformation, death and rebirth, knowledge gained through suffering. The tree itself was enormous beyond comprehension. Its roots stretched into 3 wells in 3 different realms. One root reached to Asgard, where it drank from the well of Urd, the spring of fate. Another root extended to Jotunheim, tapping the well of Mimir, the source of wisdom. The third root plunged into Niflheim, where it drew from Vergelmir, the roaring cauldron, the spring from which all rivers flowed. The tree was constantly under assault. At its base, the dragon Nidhogg gnawed at the root, touching Vergelmir. He chewed endlessly, trying to sever the tree from its foundation. Around him writhed countless serpents, all doing the same work, eating, corroding, destroying. 4 stags bounded through the upper branches, Dain, Dvalin, Dunair, and Durathror. They devoured the leaves and bark, stripping away the tree's protection. At the very top perched an unnamed eagle. Between its eyes sat a hawk called Vedrafolnir, scanning the horizons. The eagle and the dragon hated each other with ancient fury. Running up and down the trunk was Ratatoska, a squirrel whose only purpose was to carry insults between the eagle and the dragon. He scurried tirelessly, whispering slander and stoking hatred, discord personified. And yet the tree endured. Every day it was damaged. Every day it healed. The Norns, 3 ancient women who sat beside the well of Urd, tended to the tree daily. They drew water from the well and mixed it with clay from its banks. This mixture they poured over the roots to prevent rot, maintenance, daily care, the only thing keeping collapse at bay. The 9 worlds hung from Yggdrasil's branches like fruit. Asgard, realm of the Aesir, sat at the crown, a fortress of golden halls where warrior gods feasted and planned. Vanaheim, home of the Vanir, lay somewhere among the upper branches, a realm of magic and fertility less defined in the texts. Alfheim housed the light elves, beings of ethereal beauty aligned with growth and sunlight. Midgard, the middle enclosure, was the realm of humans, surrounded by ocean and the coiled body of Jörmungandr, the world serpent. Jotunheim stretched across vast wildernesses, mountains, forests, frozen wastes where the giants dwelled. Svartalfheim, or Nidavellir, was the realm beneath the earth where dwarves forged miraculous treasures in underground smithies. Niflheim remained the ancient realm of ice and mist in the north, primordial and unchanging. Muspelheim burned eternally in the south, domain of fire giants and Surtur, who waited with his flaming sword. And deep within Niflheim lay Helheim, the hall of the dead, ruled by the goddess Hel, half living and half corpse. These 9 realms weren't separate planets or dimensions in the modern sense. They were layers of reality, interpenetrating and connected. You could travel between them if you knew the way. Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, connected Asgard to Midgard. It shimmered with impossible colors, more than the spectrum human eyes could perceive. Heimdall guarded its approach, standing watch with senses so acute he could hear grass growing and see for hundreds of miles. But there were other paths. Odin could traverse the branches of Yggdrasil itself on his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir. Shamans in trance climbed the world tree's trunk, visiting different realms to retrieve souls or negotiate with spirits. This cosmology wasn't unique to the Norse. The image of a cosmic tree appears in nearly every culture. In Maya civilization, the Ceiba tree was sacred. Its roots reached into Xibalba, the underworld. Its trunk was the earthly realm. Its branches pierced the 13 layers of heaven. Kings were buried beneath saber trees so their souls could climb to the sky. In Hindu cosmology, the Ashvattha tree grows inverted. Roots in heaven, branches descending to earth. It represents the eternal Brahman, the source from which all existence flows. To cut oneself free from attachment to this tree is to achieve liberation. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Hulapu tree stood at the center of creation. The goddess Inanna tended it until a serpent nested in its roots, a bird in its crown, and a demon in its trunk. Her brother Gilgamesh slew the serpent and cut down the tree to make furniture, an act that mirrors Odin's brothers dismembering Ymir. In Chinese tradition, the Jianmu tree connected heaven and earth. It stood at the center of the world on the summit of a sacred mountain. Through it, emperors communicated with heaven and received the mandate to rule. When the tree was cut down, humanity lost direct access to the divine. In Siberian shamanism, the world tree is the axis of the shaman's journey. To heal someone, the shaman enters trance and climbs the tree to the upper world, or descends to the lower world. The tree is the spine of reality, the ladder between dimensions. Even in Christianity, the cross becomes a version of the world tree. In medieval art, Christ is sometimes depicted on a living tree rather than dead wood. The lignum vitae, tree of life, death and resurrection connected by wood. Why does this symbol repeat? Why does every culture imagine a tree at the center of everything? One answer is psychological. Carl Jung argued that certain symbols arise from the collective unconscious, patterns of thought shared by all humans. The tree represents the self, rooted in the unconscious, trunk in the conscious world, branches reaching toward transcendence. Another answer is practical. Trees are the largest living things most ancient peoples encountered. They connect earth and sky. They live longer than humans. They provide food, shelter, fuel. They die and return to life each spring. Trees are obvious symbols of life itself. But there might be a deeper answer. Modern science reveals that trees actually do form networks. Underground, their roots intertwine with fungal filaments called mycorrhizae. These networks allow trees to share nutrients, warn each other of dangers, even support sick or young trees that can't photosynthesize enough on their own. Forests are not collections of individuals. They're superorganisms, interconnected systems where what affects one tree affects the whole forest. Yggdrasil is the mythological expression of this reality. Everything is connected. The 9 realms aren't separate. They're nodes in a living network. This has implications for how we understand Norse cosmology. When the myths say Yggdrasil will shake during Ragnarok, they're saying the entire network will destabilize. When the dragon gnaws at the roots, it's attacking the foundation of interconnection itself. The tree doesn't just hold up the worlds, it is the worlds. And like all living things, it's dying, slowly, inexorably. The Norns can slow the decay, but not stop it. This is entropy, the second law of thermodynamics encoded in myth. All systems tend toward disorder. All structures eventually collapse, even the spine of the universe. But here's the remarkable thing. When Ragnarok comes and the world burns, Yggdrasil doesn't fall. It trembles, it burns, but it stands. And when the new world emerges from the waves, the tree is still there, scarred perhaps, changed certainly, but alive. This is the ultimate message of Yggdrasil. Life persists, connection endures, even through apocalypse, the network holds. Before anything existed, there was temperature, not matter, not energy as we understand it, just the potential for heat and cold. Muspelheim burned in the south, Niflheim froze in the north. Between them, Ginnunga Gap, the void. This description sounds remarkably like modern cosmology. Before the Big Bang, there was no space, no time, no matter, just a singularity of infinite density and temperature. Then expansion. The universe inflated faster than light. As it expanded, it cooled. Energy condensed into particles. Particles formed atoms. atoms clumped into stars, fire meeting void, cooling into matter. The Norse told the same story in different language. Sparks from Muspelheim drifted into Ginnunga Gap. They met the ice flowing from Niflheim. Where heat touched cold, the ice began to melt. Those droplets coalesced. Life emerged. Ymir, the first giant, formed from this interaction of opposites. He wasn't created by a god. He was a natural consequence of thermodynamics. This is profoundly different from most creation myths. In Genesis, God speaks and things appear. Fiat lux, let there be light. Creation by command. The Norse version has no commanding deity at the beginning, just physical processes. Heat and cold, melting and coalescing. The gods came later. They were products of these processes, not their instigators. Audhumla, the primordial cow, emerged from the melting ice. She sustained Ymir with her milk. As she licked the salty ice for nourishment, she revealed Buri, the first of the gods. This image is striking. The gods don't descend from heaven. They're licked out of ice. They emerge gradually through patient work. Compare this to the Greek cosmogony. First came chaos, the void. From chaos emerged Gaia, the earth, and Eros, love. Then Tartarus, the underworld, and Erebus, darkness. These primordial beings then gave birth to more gods through sexual reproduction. In both Greek and Norse traditions, the gods have a genealogy. They evolve. Later generations are different from earlier ones. This contrasts sharply with monotheistic traditions where God exists eternally, unchanging and uncreated. The Norse gods were born. They aged. They could die. This makes them more like us, more understandable, more tragic. When Odin and his brothers killed Ymir, they were not all-powerful creators imposing order on chaos. They were second-generation gods improvising a solution. They saw a problem, the formless void, and they solved it with violence. They butchered Ymir's corpse and used the pieces to build the world. This is engineering, not magic. They worked with available materials. His blood became the sea, salty and violent. His flesh became soil, the substance of life. His bones became stone, the skeleton of the earth. There's a parallel here to the scientific understanding of how our world actually formed. The earth coalesced from the debris of earlier stars. The iron in our planet's core was forged in stellar furnaces billions of years ago. The carbon in our bodies was created when ancient stars exploded. We are built from the corpses of stars. The Norse said we were built from the corpse of a giant. Same pattern, different metaphor. The Chinese myth of Pangu offers an even closer parallel. Pangu was born from a cosmic egg that contained the primordial chaos. Inside the egg, yin and yang were mixed together, cold and hot, dark and light, female and male. Pangu grew inside the egg for 18,000 years. When he finally emerged, he separated yin from yang. The light elements rose and became the sky. The heavy elements sank and became the earth. Pangu stood between them, pushing them apart. Each day he grew 10 feet taller. The sky rose 10 feet higher. The earth sank 10 feet lower. This continued for another 18,000 years until sky and earth were firmly separated. Then Pangu, exhausted, died. His breath became the wind. His voice became thunder. His left eye became the sun. His right eye the moon. His blood became rivers. His muscles became the land. His hair became the stars. The pattern is identical to the Norse story. A primordial giant's body becomes the physical world. In both myths, creation requires sacrifice. Something must die for something else to live. This is thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. To build order in one place, you must increase entropy somewhere else. Ymir's death increased the order of the cosmos at the cost of his existence. But there's a cost to this order. The giants never forgot what the gods did. The world was built on murder, and that original violence echoed forward through time. When Ragnarok finally comes, it's the giants who march on Asgard. Loki leads them, the trickster who was never fully accepted by the gods despite his blood oath with Odin. Fenrir breaks his chains, the wolf who was bound because the gods feared him. Jörmungandr rises from the sea, the serpent thrown into the ocean to get him out of sight. All of Loki's children were imprisoned or exiled, not because they had done anything wrong, but because of what they might do. This is the gods' tragic flaw. They tried to prevent the prophecy by acting on it, but their very attempts to avert doom guaranteed it. By binding Fenrir, they ensured his hatred. By casting out Jörmungandr, they created a monster that encircled the world. By rejecting hell, they lost any leverage over death itself. This is the paradox at the heart of Norse cosmology. The gods knew the future. They could not change it. Their knowledge made them prisoners of fate. In Greek tragedy, this pattern is called hamartia, the tragic flaw. Oedipus tries to avoid killing his father and marrying his mother. His very attempts to avoid this fate lead him directly into it. The gods were caught in the same trap. They knew Ragnarok was coming. They tried to prepare. Their preparations brought it about. This is what makes Norse mythology so psychologically sophisticated. The gods are not omnipotent. They're subject to the same constraints as humans: time, causality, consequence. They just have more power to make bigger mistakes. Chapter 5. The Volva's Prophecy. Odin rode alone to the edge of the world, to a mound covered in frost. Beneath it lay a Volva, a seer, dead for centuries. Using necromancy, Odin forced her spirit back from Hel's realm. The earth split. The Volva rose, wrapped in decay. "Why do you disturb my rest?" Odin demanded to know the future. The Volva's voice was cold, distant. She spoke of ages long past, the creation, the golden age, the first war. Then she spoke of what was to come. Brother will fight brother. Father will kill son. All bonds will shatter. This is the Voluspa, the prophecy of the seer, one of the oldest and most important poems in Norse mythology, preserved in the Poetic Edda, compiled in Iceland around 1270 AD. By then, Iceland had been Christian for almost 300 years. The old gods were fading, but the memory of Ragnarok endured. The Volva described it in vivid detail. First would come the Thimble winter, 3 winters with no summer in between. Snow would fall without ceasing. The sun would barely rise. Crops would fail. People would starve. But worse than the physical cold would be the moral winter. Trust would erode. Families would turn on each other. Sacred oaths would be broken. Brother would betray brother for a crust of bread. This is the pattern that precedes every collapse. Social cohesion fractures before physical disaster. The Roman Empire didn't fall because barbarians invaded. It fell because Roman citizens stopped believing in Rome. The army became mercenary. The bureaucracy became corrupt. People hoarded grain instead of sharing it. When the barbarians finally did come, they found the gates open. The Norse understood this. Civilizations don't die from external threats. They die from internal decay. After the Thimble winter would come the cosmic signs. The wolf Skjold would finally catch the sun and devour it. His brother Hati would swallow the moon. The stars would vanish from the sky. Total darkness. The earth would shake. Mountains would crumble. Every bond would break. Not just social bonds, but physical ones. Fenrir would tear free from Gleipnir. His jaws would open so wide the upper jaw touched the sky and the lower jaw scraped the earth. Jörmungandr would thrash in the ocean, creating tidal waves that drowned coastlines. He would crawl onto land, his body so vast it stretched across continents. Venom would drip from his fangs and poison the sky. Loki would break his chains. He would sail from the north in Naglfar, a ship built from the fingernails of the dead. An army of dishonored dead and giants would follow him. From the south would come Surtur and the fire giants. His sword would burn brighter than the vanished sun. The heat would be so intense that Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, would shatter under his army's march. Heimdall would blow his horn, Gjallarhorn. Its sound would echo across all 9 realms, a call to war. The gods would ride out to meet their doom. On the plain of Vigrid, stretching 120 leagues in every direction, the final battle would rage. Odin would face Fenrir. The wolf would swallow him whole. Odin's son Vidar would avenge him by stepping into Fenrir's lower jaw with his special boot and tearing the wolf's mouth apart. Thor would confront Jormungandr. They had faced each other twice before. Once when Thor tried to lift the serpent disguised as a cat. Once when he tried to fish it from the ocean. Both times ended in stalemate. But not this time. Thor would strike Jormungandr with Mjolnir and kill it, but the serpent's dying breath would be a cloud of venom. Thor would take 9 steps away from the corpse. Then he would fall, poisoned. Freyr would fight Surtur. He would have no sword. He had given it away years before to win the love of the giant maiden Gerda. He would fight with an antler. He would die. Tyr and the hound Garma would kill each other. Heimdall and Loki would kill each other. The gods would fall. The giants would fall. The battlefield would be littered with corpses. Then Surtur would raise his flaming sword. Fire would spread across the earth. Asgard would burn. Midgard would burn. Even Yggdrasil would be consumed by flames. The earth would sink into the sea. Water would rush over the burning land, extinguishing the fires and swallowing everything. Silence, darkness, nothing. But the Volva's prophecy didn't end there. I see the earth rising again from the sea, green and fertile. Crops grow without being planted. A new sun rides across the sky, daughter of the old sun that was devoured. 2 humans survive, hidden in a grove. Leif and Lifthrasir, life and eager for life. They emerge and repopulate the world. Some gods return. Balder rises from Hel's realm. He and his blind brother Hoder are reconciled. Thor's sons inherit Mjolnir. They sit in the new Asgard and speak of old mysteries. The cycle continues. This vision of apocalypse and rebirth isn't unique. Nearly every culture has a flood myth. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim survives the great flood sent by the gods. He builds an ark and saves his family and animals. The story predates the biblical flood by thousands of years. In Hindu cosmology, each cycle ends in pralaya, cosmic dissolution. The god Vishnu sleeps on the cosmic ocean. When he wakes, creation begins again. In Maya belief, the world has been created and destroyed multiple times. Each previous world was flawed. The gods destroyed it and tried again. We live in the 4th or 5th iteration, depending on the version. The Chinese have the concept of the mandate of heaven. Dynasties rise and fall in cycles. When a dynasty becomes corrupt, natural disasters follow. Floods, droughts, earthquakes. These are signs that heaven has withdrawn its mandate. Revolution is not rebellion, it's cosmic correction. The pattern repeats because it reflects reality. Every ecosystem goes through cycles of growth and collapse. Forests burn. New growth emerges from the ashes. Every species eventually goes extinct. New species evolve to fill empty niches. Every star burns out. New stars form from the scattered elements. The universe itself may be cyclical. Some cosmologists propose that our Big Bang was preceded by a big crunch, the collapse of a previous universe. If this is true, then we're living in one iteration of an eternal cycle. The Norse understood this intuitively. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. Endings are beginnings. Odin knew this when he forced the vulva to speak. He knew the prophecy couldn't be changed, but he wanted to hear it anyway. Because knowing your fate doesn't make you a victim, it makes you responsible. Odin could have hidden in Asgard and waited for the end. Instead, he gathered warriors. He sought wisdom. He prepared. Not because preparation would save him, but because that's what it means to be a god. You face your doom with courage. Odin rode alone to the edge of the world, to a mound covered in frost. Beneath it lay a vulva, a seer, dead for centuries. Using necromancy, Odin forced her spirit back from Hel's realm. The earth split. The vulva rose, wrapped in decay. "Why do you disturb my rest?" Odin demanded to know the future. The vulva's voice was cold, distant. She spoke of ages long past, the creation, the golden age, the first war. Then she spoke of what was to come. Brother will fight brother. Father will kill son. All bonds will shatter. This is the Voluspa, the prophecy of the seer, one of the oldest and most important poems in Norse mythology, preserved in the Poetic Edda, compiled in Iceland around 1270 AD. By then, Iceland had been Christian for almost 300 years. The old gods were fading, but the memory of Ragnarok endured. The vulva described it in vivid detail. First would come the Fimbul winter, 3 winters with no summer in between. Snow would fall without ceasing. The sun would barely rise. Crops would fail. People would starve. But worse than the physical cold would be the moral winter. Trust would erode. Families would turn on each other. Sacred oaths would be broken. Brother would betray brother for a crust of bread. This is the pattern that precedes every collapse. Social cohesion fractures before physical disaster. The Roman Empire didn't fall because barbarians invaded. It fell because Roman citizens stopped believing in Rome. The army became mercenary. The bureaucracy became corrupt. People hoarded grain instead of sharing it. When the barbarians finally did come, they found the gates open. The Norse understood this. Civilizations don't die from external threats. They die from internal decay. After the Fimbul winter would come the cosmic signs. The wolf shoal would finally catch the sun and devour it. His brother Hati would swallow the moon. The stars would vanish from the sky. Total darkness. The earth would shake. Mountains would crumble. Every bond would break. Not just social bonds, but physical ones. Fenrir would tear free from Gleipnir. His jaws would open so wide the upper jaw touched the sky and the lower jaw scraped the earth. Jörmungandr would thrash in the ocean, creating tidal waves that drowned coastlines. He would crawl onto land, his body so vast it stretched across continents. Venom would drip from his fangs and poison the sky. Loki would break his chains. He would sail from the north in Naglfar, a ship built from the fingernails of the dead. An army of dishonored dead and giants would follow him. From the south would come Surtur and the fire giants. His sword would burn brighter than the vanished sun. The heat would be so intense that Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, would shatter under his army's march. Heimdall would blow his horn, Gjallarhorn. Its sound would echo across all 9 realms. A call to war. The gods would ride out to meet their doom. On the plain of Vigrid, stretching 120 leagues in every direction, the final battle would rage. Odin would face Fenrir. The wolf would swallow him whole. Odin's son Vidar would avenge him by stepping into Fenrir's lower jaw with his special boot and tearing the wolf's mouth apart. Thor would confront Jörmungandr. They had faced each other twice before. Once when Thor tried to lift the serpent disguised as a cat. Once when he tried to fish it from the ocean. Both times ended in stalemate. But not this time. Thor would strike Jörmungandr with Mjolnir and kill it, but the serpent's dying breath would be a cloud of venom. Thor would take 9 steps away from the corpse, then he would fall, poisoned. Freyr would fight Surtur. He would have no sword. He had given it away years before to win the love of the giant maiden Gerda. He would fight with an antler. He would die. Tyr and the hound Garmr would kill each other. Heimdall and Loki would kill each other. The gods would fall. The giants would fall. The battlefield would be littered with corpses. Then Surtur would raise his flaming sword. Fire would spread across the earth. Asgard would burn. Midgard would burn. Even Yggdrasil would be consumed by flames. The earth would sink into the sea. Water would rush over the burning land, extinguishing the fires and swallowing everything. Silence, darkness, nothing. But the Volva's prophecy didn't end there. I see the earth rising again from the sea, green and fertile. Crops grow without being planted. A new sun rides across the sky, daughter of the old sun that was devoured. 2 humans survive, hidden in a grove, Leaf and Lifthrasir, life and eager for life. They emerge and repopulate the world. Some gods return. Balder rises from Hel's realm. He and his blind brother Hoder are reconciled. Thor's sons inherit Mjolnir. They sit in the new Asgard and speak of old mysteries. The cycle continues. This vision of apocalypse and rebirth isn't unique. Nearly every culture has a flood myth. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim survives the great flood sent by the gods. He builds an ark and saves his family and animals. The story predates the biblical flood by thousands of years. In Hindu cosmology, each cycle ends in pralaya, cosmic dissolution. The god Vishnu sleeps on the cosmic ocean. When he wakes, creation begins again. In Maya belief, the world has been created and destroyed multiple times. Each previous world was flawed. The gods destroyed it and tried again. We live in the 4th or 5th iteration, depending on the version. The Chinese have the concept of the mandate of heaven. Dynasties rise and fall in cycles. When a dynasty becomes corrupt, natural disasters follow: floods, droughts, earthquakes. These are signs that heaven has withdrawn its mandate. Revolution is not rebellion, it's cosmic correction. The pattern repeats because it reflects reality. Every ecosystem goes through cycles of growth and collapse. Forests burn, new growth emerges from the ashes. Every species eventually goes extinct. New species evolve to fill empty niches. Every star burns out. New stars form from the scattered elements. The universe itself may be cyclical. Some cosmologists propose that our Big Bang was preceded by a Big Crunch, the collapse of a previous universe. If this is true, then we're living in one iteration of an eternal cycle. The Norse understood this intuitively. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. Endings are beginnings. Odin knew this when he forced the Volva to speak. He knew the prophecy couldn't be changed, but he wanted to hear it anyway. Because knowing your fate doesn't make you a victim, it makes you responsible. Odin could have hidden in Asgard and waited for the end. Instead, he gathered warriors. He sought wisdom. He prepared. Not because preparation would save him, but because that's what it means to be a god. You face your doom with courage. In the ocean that encircles Midgard lives Jörmungandr, the world serpent. He is so vast that he wraps around the entire earth and bites his own tail. He wasn't always this large. Jörmungandr was one of 3 children born to Loki and the giantess Angrboda. His siblings were Fenrir, the wolf, and Hel, half living and half corpse. When the gods learned of these children, they were afraid. Prophecies foretold that Loki's offspring would bring about Ragnarok, so the gods decided to contain them. They bound Fenrir with an unbreakable chain. They sent Hel to rule the underworld in Niflheim, and they threw Jörmungandr into the ocean. The gods thought they were solving a problem. They were creating one. Jörmungandr grew. Fed by the ocean's bounty and his own rage, he became enormous. His body stretched longer and longer until it wrapped completely around Midgard. When he bit his own tail, he formed a living barrier around the human world. This image, the serpent eating its own tail, is called the Ouroboros. It appears in nearly every culture. In ancient Egypt, the Ouroboros represented eternity, the cycle of death and rebirth. The snake sheds its skin and is born anew. In Greek philosophy, the Ouroboros symbolized unity, the idea that all things return to their source. Plato described time as a serpent eating its tail, endlessly recurring. In alchemy, the Ouroboros represented the cycle of dissolution and coagulation. Matter breaks down and reforms. The process repeats infinitely. In Chinese mythology, the dragon Zhulong coils around the world. When he opens his eyes, it's day. When he closes them, it's night. When he breathes, the seasons change. In Aztec myth, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, represents the cycle of time itself. He is both creator and destroyer. The serpent is universal because the pattern it represents is universal. Cycles, return, the eternal now eating its own past to create its own future. But Jörmungandr wasn't just a symbol. For the Norse, he was terrifyingly real. Thor encountered him 3 times. The first meeting came when Thor visited the giant king Utgarda Loki. The king challenged Thor to a series of contests. One challenge was to lift a cat. Thor, confident in his strength, grabbed the cat and tried to lift it. He strained. The cat's paws remained on the ground. Thor put all his strength into it. He managed to lift one paw. Later, Utgarda Loki revealed the truth. The cat had been Jörmungandr in disguise. Thor had been so strong that he nearly lifted the world serpent, an impossible feat. The giant king had been terrified. The second encounter came when Thor went fishing with the giant Hymir. Thor used an ox head as bait and cast his line deep into the ocean. Jörmungandr bit. Thor pulled with all his strength. The serpent rose from the depths. Thor raised his hammer to strike the killing blow. But Hymir, terrified, cut the line. Jörmungandr sank back into the ocean. Thor was furious. He'd been so close to killing the serpent. Instead, the battle was merely postponed. The third encounter would be at Ragnarok. When the final battle came, Jörmungandr would leave the ocean. He would thrash, creating tidal waves that swallowed coastlines. He would crawl onto land, his body so vast it took hours for his tail to leave the water. Thor would face him on the plain of Vigrid. This time, there would be no tricks, no interruptions. Thor would strike Jörmungandr with Mjolnir. The hammer would crush the serpent's skull. Jörmungandr would die. But with his dying breath, the serpent would exhale a cloud of venom. Thor would stagger backward, 9 steps. Then he would fall, poisoned. Mutual destruction. Neither could exist without the other. This relationship, Thor and Jörmungandr locked in eternal opposition, mirrors other mythological pairs. In Egyptian myth, Ra the sun god battles Apep the serpent every night. Apep tries to swallow Ra's sunboat. Ra defeats him, but Apep always returns the next night. The battle never ends. In Hindu myth, Vishnu battles demons in each avatar. He defeats them, but they reincarnate. The cosmic struggle continues. In Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda fights Angra Mainyu, good against evil, light against dark. The battle spans all of history until the final judgment. But Jörmungandr is more than just Thor's enemy. He serves a crucial function. By encircling Midgard, he holds the world together. He is the boundary between order and chaos. Inside his coils, civilization. Outside, the vast, unknown ocean. When he lets go of his tail at Ragnarok, the boundary dissolves. The ocean rushes in. The world is swallowed. This makes Jörmungandr both threat and protector. He contains chaos, but he also embodies it. This dual nature appears in serpent symbolism everywhere. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent brings knowledge. Adam and Eve eat from the tree and their eyes are opened. They become like gods, knowing good and evil, but this knowledge comes at the cost of innocence. In Greek myth, the god of medicine, Asclepius, carries a staff with a serpent coiled around it. The serpent represents healing, but also poison. The same symbol of danger becomes the symbol of cure. In Kundalini Yoga, a serpent sleeps coiled at the base of the spine. When awakened through practice, it rises through the chakras. This brings enlightenment, but if done wrongly, it can cause madness. The serpent is transformation. It sheds its skin and is reborn. It moves between earth and water, symbolic of crossing boundaries. Jörmungandr embodies all of this. He is the cycle itself, birth and death, creation and destruction, the wheel that turns forever. When he bites his tail, time becomes a loop. Past and future meet. Everything that has happened will happen again. This is eternal recurrence, the idea that the universe repeats itself infinitely. Friedrich Nietzsche proposed this as the ultimate test of whether you truly love life. If you knew you had to live your life exactly the same way infinite times, would you be filled with joy or despair? Would you change how you lived if you knew every moment would repeat forever? The Norse seemed to accept this possibility with equanimity. Ragnarok wasn't the end. It was a reset. The world would burn and sink, then rise again, green and fertile. Would the same events play out? Would a new Ymir be born and killed? Would new gods emerge, make the same mistakes, and face the same doom? The myths don't say, but Jörmungandr, biting his tail in the ocean, suggests that yes, the cycle would continue. Unless something changed. Unless someone learned from the past. This is the hope embedded in the myth of eternal recurrence. Yes, the pattern repeats, but conscious beings can break patterns. They can choose differently. Jörmungandr holds the world in his coils, but one day he will let go, and what happens next depends on what we've learned from the time we had. Odin hangs from Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear, 9 days and 9 nights, no food, no water, a sacrifice of himself to himself. Why would a god torture himself? For knowledge. Odin was consumed by the need to know. He traveled in disguise, questioning everyone he met. He consulted the Norns. He spoke to dead vulvas. He drank from the well of Mimir. But the deepest knowledge required the deepest sacrifice. The runes. These weren't just letters. They were symbols of power. Each rune contained within it a fundamental principle of reality. To know the runes was to know how the universe operated. But the runes couldn't be taught. They had to be earned. So Odin hung himself from the world tree. This was a shamanic initiation, death and rebirth. For 9 days he suffered. His body weakened. His mind opened. On the edge of death, perception changes. The barrier between self and world dissolves. In that liminal space, Odin saw the runes. He screamed. He grabbed them. He fell from the tree, gasping. But he had them. This story parallels initiation rites across cultures. In Siberian shamanism, a shaman must undergo a symbolic death. Spirits tear the shaman's body apart and rebuild it. Only after this ordeal can the shaman journey between worlds. In Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama sat beneath the Bodhi tree and vowed not to move until he achieved enlightenment. He was assailed by Mara, the demon of delusion, but he held firm. At dawn, he became the Buddha, the awakened one. In Christianity, Christ hangs on the cross. He descends into hell. On the 3rd day, he rises, death and resurrection. The parallels to Odin's ordeal are striking. Both hang from a tree. Both are pierced. Both achieve transformation through suffering. But there's a key difference. Christ dies for humanity's sins. Odin sacrifices himself to himself. He's not saving anyone else. He's pursuing knowledge for its own sake. This makes Odin more like Prometheus, the Greek titan who stole fire from the gods to give to humanity. Zeus punished him by chaining him to a rock where an eagle ate his liver every day. The liver regenerated each night, and the torture repeated. Prometheus suffered not for his own benefit, but to bring light to mortals. He's a savior figure. Odin is more ambiguous. He hoards knowledge. He uses it for his own purposes. But that knowledge came at a cost, not just the 9 days on the tree. Earlier, Odin had given up his eye. He traveled to the well of Mimir, a spring of wisdom located beneath one of Yggdrasil's roots in Jotunheim. The giant Mimir guarded it. Odin asked for a drink from the well. Mimir refused. The price was too high, he said. Odin insisted. Mimir named his price. An eye. Odin didn't hesitate. He plucked out his own eye and dropped it into the well. It sank to the bottom, where it still floats, watching from beneath the surface. In exchange, Odin drank deep from the well. He gained knowledge of all things past and present, but not all things future. That's why he continued seeking. He knew what had been, he knew what was, but the future remained murky. This partial knowledge tormented him. He could glimpse fragments of what was to come, enough to know that Ragnarok would happen, but not enough to prevent it. This is the curse of the seeker. The more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. Socrates understood this. I know that I know nothing. True wisdom begins with recognizing your ignorance. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from ignorance, but the cure isn't simply gaining more knowledge. It's seeing through the illusion of separateness. Odin pursued knowledge relentlessly. He learned cedar magic from Freya, a practice considered unmanly for a male god. He didn't care about reputation. He cared about wisdom. He disguised himself as a wanderer and traveled through Midgard, testing the hospitality and wit of mortals. He engaged in contests of riddles with giants. He consulted the dead. Every morning, his two ravens, Hugin and Munin, Thought and Memory, flew across the 9 realms and returned at dusk to whisper everything they'd seen. But there was one thing Odin feared. He feared that one day the ravens wouldn't return. That thought would abandon him. That memory would fail. This is the tragedy of consciousness. We know we will forget. We know we will lose our faculties. We know we will die. And yet, we continue to seek meaning. Odin embodies this paradox. He's the wise god who knows his wisdom won't save him. He's the All-Father who knows he'll be devoured by a wolf. His story asks, if knowledge doesn't lead to salvation, why pursue it? The answer seems to be, because that's what it means to be fully alive. To seek, to question, to sacrifice for understanding. Odin gave his eye, one window on the world. In return, he gained inner sight. He hung on the tree, suspended between life and death. In return, he gained the runes, tools for shaping reality. These weren't gifts, they were transactions. Pay the price, receive the knowledge. This transactional nature of wisdom appears in many traditions. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero searches for immortality. He finds Utnapishtim, the flood survivor, who tells him about a plant at the bottom of the sea that grants eternal youth. Gilgamesh ties stones to his feet and descends. He retrieves the plant. But on the journey home, a serpent steals the plant while Gilgamesh bathes. The serpent sheds its skin, reborn. Gilgamesh returns empty-handed. The lesson: immortality isn't available to humans. But Gilgamesh gained something else, the wisdom that mortality gives life meaning. In the Hebrew Bible, Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge. They gain awareness of good and evil. The cost? They're expelled from Eden. They become mortal. Knowledge and suffering are linked. In Greek myth, Cassandra is given the gift of prophecy by Apollo, but when she rejects him, he curses her. She can see the future, but no one will believe her. She knows Troy will fall. She warns everyone. They ignore her. Troy falls exactly as she predicted. This is Odin's situation. He knows Ragnarok is coming. He tries to prepare, but his preparations don't prevent it. Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is how you face what you know is coming. Odin could have hidden in Asgard and waited for the end. Instead, he gathered warriors. He sought allies. He prepared for battle, even knowing he would lose. That's courage, not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. The runes Odin won from the tree gave him power, but more importantly, they gave him agency. He couldn't change the destination, but he could choose the journey. The runes were not simply an alphabet. Each symbol contained a concept, a force, a piece of the universe's operating system. To write a rune was to invoke its power. The word rune comes from Old Norse rune, meaning mystery or secret. The runes were hidden knowledge. They were equations written in symbol form. There were 24 runes in the Elder Futhark, the oldest known runic alphabet. Each had a name and meaning beyond its phonetic sound. Fehu meant cattle, but also wealth and abundance. Uruz meant aurochs, a wild ox, but also primal strength. Thurisaz meant giant or thorn, representing both danger and protection. These weren't arbitrary associations. Each rune encoded a principle. This idea that symbols contain power is universal. In ancient Egypt, hieroglyphs weren't just writing. They were medu necha, the words of the gods. To write a person's name was to give them power in the afterlife. To deface a cartouche was to destroy a pharaoh's soul. In the Hebrew tradition, the alphabet itself is sacred. God created the world through language, speaking it into existence. Each Hebrew letter has a numerical value and mystical significance. Kabbalists study these correspondences through gematria, finding hidden meanings by calculating the numerical values of words. In China, the I Ching uses 64 hexagrams, combinations of broken and unbroken lines. Each hexagram represents a state of change. Together, they map all possible transformations. The I Ching isn't just divination. It's a philosophical system encoding the dynamic nature of reality. The runes functioned similarly. They weren't passive marks on a page. They were active agents. Carving a rune on a sword made it sharper. Inscribing a rune on a ship protected it from storms. Writing a curse in runes could bring misfortune to an enemy. But this power was dangerous. Use runes incorrectly, and they could harm the practitioner. In the Egil saga, a young woman falls ill. Egil Skallagrimson, a famous Viking poet and warrior, investigates. He finds runes carved beneath her bed, a love charm inscribed by an unskilled practitioner. But the runes were carved wrong. Instead of inducing love, they were causing sickness. Egil destroys the faulty runes and carves new ones. The woman recovers immediately. The lesson is clear. Runes are technology. They must be used correctly or they malfunction. This parallels how we think about language today. Philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein argued that the limits of our language are the limits of our world. We can't think thoughts for which we have no words. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests that language shapes perception. Cultures with many words for snow perceive more distinctions in snow. Languages that encode time differently may experience time differently. If this is true, then learning new symbols, new ways of encoding reality, expands what we can perceive and do. When Odin learned the runes, he gained access to hidden dimensions of reality. He could see patterns invisible to others. He could manipulate forces that seemed magical to the uninitiated. But really, he'd just learned the operating system. There's a modern parallel in mathematics. Mathematical notation is a language for describing reality. Einstein's equation E equals mc squared is a rune of sorts. It's a compact symbol encoding a profound truth about the relationship between matter and energy. Once you understand this equation, you can do things that seem impossible. You can calculate the energy released in nuclear fission. You can understand why the sun shines. The equation is a key that unlocks a door. The runes work the same way. Each rune was a key to a specific aspect of reality. Combine runes correctly, and you could achieve extraordinary results. This connects to the idea that the universe is fundamentally informational. Modern physicists talk about the universe as a computational process. The laws of physics are algorithms. Matter and energy are information in different forms. If this is true, then learning the fundamental symbols, the runes of physics, gives you power over reality. The Norse intuited this. They understood that reality has a structure. Learn the structure, and you gain leverage. But the runes weren't just practical tools. They were also a system of divination. A Volva or Vitki, a rune master, would cast rune stones and read the patterns. The configuration revealed hidden truths or future possibilities. This wasn't fortune-telling in the cheap sense. It was pattern recognition. The present contains seeds of the future. Current conditions constrain what can happen next. Someone skilled at reading patterns can make educated guesses about likely outcomes. The runes provided a framework for this reading. Compare this to how we use data models today. Meteorologists input current conditions into weather models to predict storms. Economists analyze trends to forecast recessions. Doctors review symptoms to diagnose disease. None of these are perfect, but they're better than random guessing. The runes were a pre-scientific model for understanding cause and effect. But they were also something more, a spiritual practice. Meditating on a rune was a form of contemplation. You would focus on its shape, its sound, its meaning. Over time, you'd internalize the principle it represented. This is similar to mantra meditation in Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Repeating a sacred sound like Om isn't just noise. It's a method for attuning consciousness to fundamental vibrations. The Norse believed that sound itself had power. The spoken rune was more powerful than the written one. Vibration affected reality directly. Modern physics confirms that everything is vibration. Atoms are clouds of probability vibrating at specific frequencies. Light is electromagnetic oscillation. Sound is pressure waves. If you could tune into the right frequency, maybe you could influence matter. That's not magic. That's resonance. The runes, then, weren't supernatural. They were a proto-scientific system for engaging with natural forces. Odin's sacrifice to gain them makes sense in this context. Knowledge of how the universe operates is worth any price. Because with that knowledge comes freedom, not freedom from fate. The Norse never promised that, but freedom to act with understanding, to move through the world with eyes open. This is what separates Odin from the other gods. Thor is strength, Freya is fertility, but Odin is consciousness itself. The one who seeks, the one who questions, the one who pays the price for knowing. And in the end, that's the most human quality of all. Before the gods, there were giants. Ymir was the first, but he wasn't the last. The Jotnar, the frost giants, descended from Bergelmir and his wife, the only survivors of Ymir's blood flood. They rebuilt their civilization in Jotunheim, a realm of mountains, forests, and frozen wastes. The myths paint the giants as enemies of the gods. Thor spent much of his time traveling to Jotunheim to bash giant skulls with Mjolnir. The gods fortified Asgard against giant incursions, and at Ragnarok, armies of giants would march on the gods. But this enmity obscures a more complex relationship. The giants weren't simply monsters. They were the original inhabitants. They were nature itself, wild, powerful, and amoral. Many giants were wise. Mimir, guardian of the Well of Wisdom, was a giant. Vafthrudnir challenged Odin to a contest of knowledge and nearly won. Suttungr possessed the mead of poetry, the drink that granted eloquence and inspiration. And the gods repeatedly intermarried with giants. Odin's mother, Bestla, was a giantess. Thor's mother, Jörd, was the earth itself, a giantess. Freya fell in love with Gerda, a giant maiden whose beauty outshone the sun. Njord married Skadi, daughter of a giant he'd killed. The line between god and giant was permeable. This suggests that the conflict wasn't racial or essential, it was political. The gods represented order, civilization, and structure. The giants represented chaos, wilderness, and freedom. Neither could exist without the other. Order needs chaos to define itself against. Chaos needs order as something to rebel against. This dynamic appears in creation myths worldwide. In Greek mythology, the Olympian gods overthrew the Titans. The Titans were the older generation, massive beings who personified natural forces. Kronos represented time. Oceanus represented the ocean. Hyperion represented light. When Zeus and his siblings defeated the Titans, they established a new order. But they didn't destroy the Titans entirely. They imprisoned them in Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld. The old powers were contained but not eliminated. In Hindu mythology, the Devas and Asuras are eternally opposed. The Devas are gods of order and light. The Asuras are demons of chaos and darkness. But originally, they were equals, children of the same primordial being. They compete for cosmic resources and divine favor. Neither side can win permanently. The struggle maintains balance. In the Bible, the Nephilim are mentioned briefly in Genesis. There were giants in the earth in those days. The sons of God came to the daughters of men and had children, giants. The text is cryptic, but it suggests a time when divine beings walked the earth and mingled with humans. These hybrids were mighty warriors of renown. Later tradition expanded on this. The Book of Enoch describes fallen angels who taught humans forbidden knowledge, metalworking, cosmetics, astrology. The Nephilim were their offspring, giants who corrupted the earth. God sent the flood to cleanse the world of them. The pattern repeats. An earlier race of giants existed before humanity. They possessed great power. They were eventually overthrown or contained. Why is this story universal? One possibility, it's memory. Not literal history, but cultural memory. When Indo-European peoples spread across Europe and Asia, they encountered indigenous populations. These people had been living on the land for thousands of years. They knew the terrain. They had established traditions. The newcomers brought new gods, sky gods, warrior gods. But the old gods didn't disappear. They became giants, demons, fairies, liminal beings associated with the wild places. The myths of giant slaying might preserve memories of conflict between cultures. The invaders defeated the indigenous people militarily, but they absorbed elements of the indigenous religion. This would explain why the gods keep marrying giants. It's cultural fusion encoded in myth. There's another possibility. Maybe the giants represent an even earlier stratum, not just pre-Indo-European, but pre-agricultural. Hunter-gatherers lived differently than farmers. They moved with the seasons. They didn't build permanent structures. They worshipped differently. When agriculture arrived, it brought a new way of life, settled communities, hierarchies, the concept of property. The older way was displaced, but not forgotten. It lived on in stories about beings who dwelled in the forest and mountains, giants, trolls, wild folk. These weren't literal creatures. They were memory given form. The Norse giants embody this liminality. They're powerful but uncivilized, wise but dangerous, ancient but not eternal. And at Ragnarok, they return. From every direction, giant armies converge on Asgard, Surtur and the fire giants from the south, frost giants from the north. Loki leads a ship full of giants from the east. This is the return of the repressed. Everything the gods tried to suppress, chaos, wildness, primal forces, comes roaring back. You can't maintain order forever. Eventually the boundaries fail. The old powers reassert themselves. This isn't pessimism, it's realism. Every civilization collapses. Every empire falls. The wilderness always reclaims what was cleared. But that's not the end of the story. After Ragnarok, after the fire and flood, after the gods and giants have killed each other, the earth rises again. Green, fertile, ready for a new age. The giants then aren't evil, they're necessary. They're the force of destruction that makes renewal possible. Without winter, there's no spring. Without death, there's no birth. Without chaos, there's no creation. The gods understood this on some level. That's why they kept marrying giants. They needed that wild blood, that connection to primal forces. Pure order is sterile. Pure chaos is destructive. Life exists in the tension between them. The giants remind us of this. They are the wild within us, the untamed forces we can't fully control. And when the final battle comes, they will have their reckoning.